So, Bob, this past week, really, actually, in the past couple of weeks, we have seen. The Senate's on vacation, but there are two separate bipartisan proposals coming out of the Senate to protect Robert Mueller from a unilateral move by Donald Trump to fire Mueller. And of course, we also this week had Rod Rosenstein starting off the beginning of the week saying, I would only fire Mueller if he did something wrong, or I would allow him the scope of the investigation wherever he found criminal activity. That's pretty broad, right? I mean, you don't know if there's criminal activity until you start investigating there. So theoretically, you could have a pretty broad investigation. But one of the things, and you wrote about this past week, that I frankly have been saying since November, was the money laundering that Donald Trump surely, and Trump Inc., if you will, surely has been around in some fashion or another, could very well catch up to him. And that's exactly what you wrote about. You asked the question, what did Trump and Kushner know about Russian money laundering, and when did they know about it? What's your sense? What did they know about it?
Well, you raised a whole bunch of questions at once, so maybe we can get back to the question of his ability to fire Mueller or not, or to restrict what he does. But it's pretty clear by now that Robert Mueller, the special counsel who's investigating Russiagate, has tromped all over the red line that the president drew when he said reluctantly, okay, you can investigate Russia, but don't get into my finances. He said that in a couple of interviews with the New York Times and with the Wall Street Journal. The point that I'm making in several of these pieces that I've done is that Russia and his family finances are the same thing. So it isn't even that he's going from Russia to Trump's finances. But in fact, to understand perhaps why Trump and his family are so solicitous and positive about Vladimir Putin and the Russians is because the Trump family money is so organically tied up with the Russians. Some of that, no doubt, is legal, but there are also, as you say, questions about whether some of it is illegal, whether some of it is laundered funds from Russian oligarchs. There's a lot to unpack in the story of that money laundering, but in my opinion, the weak link in all of that is Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law.
Now, all right. So let's put aside for a moment Trump's relationships that could lead to money laundering, and frankly, it's well known. It certainly was before he even entered into politics. His longstanding ties to various organized crime figures, some of whom were associated with the Russian mob. So what is it about Kushner? What do you perceive as being Kushner's liability in the context of money laundering?
Well, there are probably many, many aspects of Kushner's business dealings as a heir to an important real estate empire in New York, even before he married into Trump's empire. There are probably many different things that we could look at, but the best way to look into it is to start with that famous meeting that happened a year ago in June, the one that many people considered to be kind of a smoking gun in the Russia investigation, where Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort, the campaign manager, sat down and met with a team of Russians. The Russian team was led by a woman named Natalia Veselnitskaya. And let's call her Natalia for the sake of people's eardrums. Natalia was not just any old lawyer. She was the main political representative for Russia in trying to undo a set of very serious sanctions that were imposed on the Russians over a period starting in 2012 under the Magnitsky Act. That was her main focus. And as part of that, besides the political part of it, she's a lawyer, and she represented a company called Prevazon Holdings. Now, this may get a little bit tangled, so I'll try to explain it step by step. But in fact, the day that she met with Trump Jr., with Kushner, and with Manafort, she was that day in court in New York representing Prevazon Holdings in a money laundering case. And that money laundering case, it turns out, ties into Trump's lawyers, it ties into Kushner personally, and it ties into several oligarchs who had business dealings with the Trump family, including Kushner. Let me explain, first of all, about Prevazon. What triggered this whole Russian sanctions thing under the Magnitsky Act was the looting of a company called Hermitage Capital back about 10 years ago. And this company was run by William Browder, an American investor who went into Russia in the 90s to try to make a fortune, and he did. So this company was attacked by friends of Putin, by the government, and by private interests working together. They basically took it over, stole a whole bunch of money, got a big tax refund from the Russian government, which they also stole. And those funds were laundered into the West, including into the United States. So 4 years ago, the U.S. Attorney in New York, Preet Bharara, filed a big money laundering case against Prevazon, accusing them of having laundered these Russian funds. And it was that case that Kushner's friend, Veselnitskaya, who was meeting with Kushner at that Trump Tower meeting, it was that case that she was arguing on behalf of this company, Prevazon. Now, it turns out that a few years before that, Kushner bought a building in Times Square worth almost $300 million from another Russian investor who's tied into Prevazon. So, and this is called Africa Israel Investments, AFI. And that company, AFI, was a partner of Prevazon. They sold a big building to Kushner. And, you know, that raises the question, was part of the laundered funds from Prevazon sort of holed up in that building in Times Square when he sold it to Kushner a few years ago? Was Kushner basically helping him launder that money? Where did Kushner get the loan from that helped him buy that building? We don't know. But all of this whole tangle of real estate, and believe me, it's more complicated even than that, it makes that meeting that he had in Trump Tower look really important now. It isn't just that they went to them and said, look, the Russians came and said, we got dirt on Hillary Clinton and we're going to hand it over to you at this meeting. Do you want to meet? And Don Jr. says, yeah, I'd love that. Let's do it. And they all meet to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. Yeah, that's part of it. But the people involved in that were people that Kushner knew, that he had business dealings with, that he may have helped launder funds with. And that's something that once Muller can start pulling on all those threads and getting the bank records and the money transfers and the emails and the phone call records. And, of course, Muller can get subpoenas for a lot of those things, but he can also have the spy agencies go back into their records, because a lot of these people are long been followed around and wiretapped, and
Bob,
everything else.
I have a couple of questions, and let's take a break. When we come back, I want to ask you about further about this Prevazin nexus between the people who were at that meeting and business dealings that Kushner has had, even prior to Donald Trump running. And I also want to talk about, there were other people in that room who were also involved in money laundering, or at least had run afoul of the law, and also the disposition of that Prevazin case and how it ended up getting settled so quickly, and maybe coincidentally, after the election. We got to take a quick break. I'm talking to Bob Dreyfuss, who's written a piece in The Nation. What did Trump and Kushner know about Russian money laundering, and when did they know it? I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back.